Welcome into the Russ Joy Show. I'm Russ Joy. You knew that because you're smart, and it's also the name of the show. It is a beautiful Tuesday, a terrific Tuesday. Not a terrible Tuesday. It could have been a terrible Tuesday, but it is a terrific Tuesday. And that's because Alec Bohm went and showed out on behalf of your team, your town, your Philadelphia Phillies on Monday night in the Home Run Derby. 6 Phillies, as many as 6 Phillies, could get into tonight's MLB All-Star Game. 2 didn't make the trip. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Jalen Hurts was left off a top 10 quarterback list, which we will also get to. And of course, Joel Embiid creating controversy, allegedly, somehow. At least the discourse on social media around Joel Embiid has created some level of controversy around USA basketball. We're going to get into all of that today, plus anything else you want to talk about. You join over in the comments section over on the Russ Joy Show YouTube channel, Joy Media LLC YouTube channel, or over on X, at Joy on Broad. Usually the show is also broadcast through the Joy Media account on X and the Russ Joy Show on X. However, I have run into an issue with Elon Musk's X, which I, enjoy being a part of. I enjoy being able to put the show on. I noticed yesterday during Crossing Broadcast that it said you can't stream to the Crossing Broad account because it's not a premium account. And I'm, well, that's silly. How could that be? It has like over 100,000 followers. What are we doing? And then I realized as I went to start the show today that I couldn't put it out through the other accounts. So now I've got to go and manually put it out. So here we are. Welcome into the show. The best place to watch this, of course, is on YouTube at The Russ Joy Show. If you watch on the Joy Media account, I love and appreciate you just as much. I would actually encourage you that if you watch on The Russ Joy Show, you go and still subscribe to the Joy Media LLC account and vice versa because, well, one is for this show specifically, and the other one is kind of like your catch-all. It's a place that you can find this show and Snow the Goalie, and it's just wrestling all in one place. But subscribing to those channels, liking the video, sharing the video, and subscribing, that does help. I noticed that there was at least 1 5-star rating over on Apple Podcasts, so I appreciate all of you in the podcast feed who did that. I have not checked Spotify. I would love to get to a point where we have a 5-star review or two. I'll read it on the show. If you like the show, you hate the show, you're indifferent, by all means, leave a 5-star review. I'll read it on the show. But it was a big night. If you were a Phillies fan and you went into last night, and we talked about this on yesterday's Crossing Broadcast, Alec Bohm was plus 1,300 as of yesterday around noon to win the Home Run Derby. Those odds jumped significantly throughout the first round. But Alec Bohm went into that competition last night very much the underdog, the longest odds to win, and ended up walking away from the first round of the Home Run Derby in first place, 21 home runs in the first round. It was a tie, but he technically was the leader. 21 home runs in the first round. A very line drive hitter. A guy who, if you paid attention, which I'm sure you did if you watched the Home Run Derby, was getting a lot of pitches up high, was just driving them out, a lot of line drive home runs. I had a little bit of panic. I will admit that as I watched the next 4 hitters, I was just very calmly trying to will him into the semifinals. And it happened, which was fantastic. But then you have the fear of like, all right, it's been at least an hour and a half. It's been an hour, 45 minutes. Is the guy going to be able to hold it together? Is he going to be able to get himself back into some sort of a rhythm? And the answer to that question was a bit of a mixed bag because he struggled when he came back from the break. In fact, he hit only 3 home runs before calling timeout. And then Alec Bohm did exactly what he's supposed to do. He took a moment with the rest of his teammates. They kind of pieced it together. They got themselves kind of worked out the same way that Vladdy Guerrero went and kind of helped out Teoscar, in his round, in his first round, where he was having a real big issue with trying to figure out where to locate the ball. And Vladdy goes up and says, left center field bullpen. All of a sudden, that flipped his entire home run derby on its head. Bohm goes and he meets with his teammates. And there were a few things. And if you looked at the thumbnail of this episode, you will notice that one of the things that his teammates brought over to him was a water jug, which was really funny because, well, the national announcers had a little bit of a hard time explaining what exactly water is and why Bohm's teammates felt the need to bring it over. And it was funny, too, because it was Bryson Stott on X last night during the home run derby went out of his way to say, get the jug, and get the jug they did. And we'll throw this up here on the screen. Bryce Harper brings up the water jug. And now, in fairness, in the first round, the water jug helped. And in the second round, in the semifinals, the water jug helped. Now, I don't know what's in that water. I don't know what's in there. I'm not sure. Performance enhancing? No. But it was funny. And, people like to talk about Bryce Harper being a guy who's a serial panderer. And, there's fairness to that. I think if at this point as a fan, you can't admit the fact that Bryce Harper panders, then we're on a totally different plane of existence, right? But it's good and it's funny. The cool thing about last night is that you had 5 other Phillies there as All-Stars supporting Alec Bohm. Now, 2 that didn't make the trip are Ranger Suarez and Zach Wheeler, both of whom are presumably injured to varying degrees, but neither of them made the trip to Texas. I have to be honest, I found that a little bit disappointing. And this isn't I'm not trying to stir up a controversy here, but I do think it's a little bit disappointing that you had 2 guys who were selected to an all-star team. Wheeler's been there before. Suarez, this was a really big moment for him. I get that you don't want to put a guy on a plane if he's injured, and I get that it's a long drive, so maybe there is no way to make it a doable situation. But I was a little bit bummed because here you are, you set a franchise record with 8 all-stars going to the game. It would have been a cool moment to have all 8 there. But anyway, you had 6 there last night, 5 supporting Bohm. And it was a really neat moment. It was a cool moment if you're a Phillies fan, because there have been so many years, especially in the last decade, where the Phillies almost felt like they were being kind of given the token all-star, where it's I don't know, this guy might have put up good numbers, but he's on a really bad team or an underperforming team. So there was something really neat about those guys all going out together. And I'm actually going to pop this up on the screen because if you haven't seen this one yet, this is actually pretty cool as well. Seeing all these guys out there supporting Alec Bohm in the home run derby. So you've got, there we go. There's everybody. That's pretty cool. The number of times in your life that you've ever seen this many Phillies in an all-star game, few and far between, obviously, again, 8 set the franchise record. To have that level of excellence, to have that many guys out and able to support their teammate is really cool. I also have to say, I think these hats are fantastic. I don't know how you feel about them. Let me know in the comments. I think these hats were absolutely fantastic. Would I consider breaking one of my basic principles of buying a new hat every so many years? I think I would. I think they're really cool. Anyway, Bohm goes out. He does a few really neat things for his teammates. They're out there to support him. And here's another thing, if you haven't seen it yet, and people in the podcast feed, I'm sorry to you more than anybody because you don't get to see this, but Bohm went into the home run derby last night, and his bat had the numbers of his teammates on it. So they all look like, I would say they look like poker chips, right? But I thought that was really cool. A nice touch. Another way to kind of have his teammates with him there, putting their numbers on the bat. I thought that was really neat. Anyway, Bohm goes out, leads the first round in home runs, has to take an hour and a half off, gets himself back in. Like I said, 3 home runs. Then he takes the break. Then he goes on a bit of a tear. And the cool thing about the home run derby, and I think we are all aware of how this works, but a guy starts to see the ball better. And all of a sudden, somebody who was struggling 1 minute can all of a sudden put up 5 or 6 home runs in a row. And to me, an idiot, a person who never played baseball, a person who has absolutely no hand-eye coordination, I can't fathom how you can get in a locked in a rhythm to hit 5, 6 in a row. But we see it routinely. There was one cool thing in the first round of the home run derby, and it started with Bohm, and it was something that I made a comparison to, but there's something really neat about the camera work that they did in this home run derby, truly, I think. And one of the neat things that they did, you're used to seeing certain angles of watching the home runs go, and they had the hard cam was set up higher at Globe Life Field last night. So sometimes you had a little bit of a depth perception issue where you would watch the speed coming off the bat, and that typically told you if it was going to go out or not, depending on the hitter. But there were a few times, especially on Bohm's final out in the semifinal, where you're like, all right, we hope it's going out, you hope it's going out, and then it lands a few feet short of the wall. but because of where the hard cam was, it was a little bit deceptive. There was a really cool angle that I absolutely loved. And as I've now kind of leaned into this entire idea of bringing a million things up on the screen to start the show, I'm just going to keep it going. Now I can't stop, won't stop. I made this comparison last night, and then I actually found an image, and I'm like, wow, I was actually very spot on. But partway through Bohm's first round, they switched to this camera angle. And I said, this looked like something out of Ken Griffey Jr.'s Slugfest on N64. And I mean, in fairness, pretty spot on. And then the funny part was, I noted that, and like, what was it, 10 minutes later, Ken Griffey Jr. ends up on the telecast. And I don't know, as a 90s kid, as somebody who grew up in the N64 era, Ken Griffey Jr. will always have a very special place in my heart. And so I thought that was really cool. It was like a neat moment that he was there, that he was offering insight. He was talking. It was there was actually one of the cool bits of insight that he had. You know, they asked him about what does a guy need to be a legitimate home run hitter? Like, is it all in the arms? Is it a split between the arms and legs? And Griffey was like, well, it's really your legs and it's your hands. And he talked about, like, if you had ever shaken Willie Mays' hand, for example, it's an incredibly strong hand. And that, you know, your arms are a big part of it, but really it's your legs and the strength in your hands. I thought Griffey was fantastic. That made me want to hear Ken Griffey Jr. as like a lead color commentator. That's what I walked away with last night, saying I would like to listen to this guy more. I'd like to listen to this guy in big games for that kind of insight. But anyway, the home run derby was a lot of fun. Bohm ends up in a tiebreaker in a swing off, and it kind of stunk, but I think we all probably felt the same thing, that once he ended up in that swing off, it was probably over because of the way that he was hitting, because of the way that things were trending for him. It was going to be complicated. It was going to be tough for him to get through. And it felt like his opponent was more locked in. So anyway, it was a really good home run derby. If you watched it, by all means, let me know in the comments what you thought. I thought it was a really good one. I think that their integration of tech, I think that what I said is like the Slugfest angle was really good, was fantastic, and was really interesting. All right, let's go over to the comments really quick. Andrew Fawcett checks in and says, good morning. Good morning, Andrew. Spiral Out, what up, Russ? Ford is here for now. Love and appreciate all of you for hopping on this morning on a beautiful Tuesday, a terrific Tuesday. Now let's talk about the All-Star Game tonight. And then we have some Sixers stuff and we have some Eagles stuff. Let's talk about the All-Star Game. I think that we're all in a position right now where we can admit that the MLB All-Star Game hasn't been must-watch in a very long time. And there were baseball purists who hated the idea of the All-Star Game dictates home field advantage. However, if you think back to those days, there was an incentive to perform well, and there was an incentive to play this game a lot harder than you might imagine. Now, not everyone who was in the All-Star Game was necessarily incentivized to play for home field, because some guys played on very bad teams that were never going to have a shot to make the playoffs in the first place. But there was something about having that carrot kind of dangled out to you that would have brought a lot of meaning to the game. And once they got rid of that, it kind of felt like things fell off. They fell off pretty significantly. And what was once a must-see event became something that, like, maybe you wanted to DVR, maybe. And I say you maybe wanted to DVR it just so you could kind of fast forward through commercials and maybe skip entire innings, or you wanted to wait until you could see your pitcher get out on the mound, or you would skip around to watch the guys who were hitting from your team have their at-bats and then turn it off. But the MLB All-Star Game isn't something that gets me excited. Now, admittedly, my love of baseball and my interest in baseball had waned in recent years because it's inherently tied to the Phillies and their ability to be a good team. But, like, the Phillies have 6 All-Stars that could potentially play tonight. Am I going to watch the entire All-Star Game? Probably not. In fact, I think I'm going to be one of the people who's going to DVR it and go back in and check it. Or, more likely than not, I'll follow it on social media. And I'll monitor how these guys do. I'll monitor how Trey Turner and Bryce Harper, how they look at the plate, and how Bohm looks at the plate. And if Strahm gets in, and if Christopher Sanchez gets in, I will monitor how the Phillies are doing. But as an event, I genuinely don't care about the All-Star Game. And it's a shame. I do feel like there was a time, And it was like 20 years ago now, to make myself feel old, but it was about 20 years ago is when I think a lot of All-Star games were kind of in rhythm and they weren't missable experiences. Again, you had home field advantage on the line in baseball. I think back to the NBA All-Star Game. I always point to this poster because this to me was like one of the best times in the NBA. Iverson, Vince Carter, Kobe wearing the 8, Kevin Garnett with Minnesota, Chris Webber tearing it up for the Kings. We're going to ignore Michael Jordan with the Wizards. Let's not go too crazy here. Let's not go full revisionist history. But that was a great time in the league. And it's funny, when I think about the NBA All-Star Game, the one thing that I do remember and that I feel like is where we kind of lost our way as a collective basketball fan base is, do you remember how the NBA All-Star Game, they used to wear their jerseys? Like they used to wear their team's jerseys. So you would watch AI in a Sixers jersey pass the ball up to Vince Carter in a Raptors jersey, who would alley-oop it to Shaq in a Magic jersey or whatever. Like, I remember those days. You'd watch Kobe run like a give and go with Kevin Garnett. To me, those were like the best days of the NBA All-Star Game from like when I was a kid. You can't hold it against me if I don't go back and watch games from before I was born. And if you do, that's just incredibly unfair, and you should feel bad about it. But the MLB All-Star Game is not a must-watch event. How you fix it, I don't know. I made some pitches yesterday about like what you could do with the home run derby, how you could make the home run derby a more interesting thing to watch. You know, you could have different point values. You could tell guys they have to target a certain part of the outfield. Right field is worth 2 points this round. Or, you know, your last 5 pitches, if you hit any of them to straightaway center, that's 4 points. Whatever it is. Like, that's an interesting-ish way to make the home run derby more exciting. I don't know what you could do with the MLB All-Star Game to make it more interesting, to make it more exciting. You could put home field back on the line, but again, not every player is incentivized. You could offer more money to these guys, like significantly more money for them to care and to play. But ultimately, I don't think that's going to be a big motivator, except for, you know, guys who've made their first All-Star Game who don't make a lot of money as is, or a lot of money relative to the other All-Stars. I don't know if there's a way to fix it. Ultimately, maybe it doesn't matter. Like, maybe the way that people have been monitoring the declining TV ratings for the All-Star Game, like maybe it is just going to be something where it's super niche and that there isn't a lot of mass appeal. And as somebody who's a pro wrestling fan, like, I get that. Sometimes you have a product that is very niche and isn't trying to market itself to a casual fan or to a casual viewer. Like, maybe that's where baseball is going to end up. And while their TV partners might not be happy, and while they might not want to say, hey, you know what? These ratings suck, fix it. Like, maybe the networks might say that. Ultimately, baseball might just have to, you try to make a couple of tweaks. You try to make it look like you're giving it your best effort. But ultimately, I think, again, this All-Star Game is best followed on social media in short clips, short bursts. If anything happens, you're going to see it there. Baseball, to me, is a very clippable sport. Why sit down for 2 to 3 hours if you're watching a team that's not very good? Why sit down and watch those games when you can just follow along on social media? In the case of the Phillies, who are off to this incredible start, it's a little bit different because it feels like every game, every inning, there's something big happening. And you want to actually take in a great team while you can, because we have seen a lot of mediocre at best teams here. So all of that covered, I'm ready to move on from baseball. If you are as well, we can move on as a collective. Let's go to the Sixers. And it's not the Sixers on the court here, but it's a Sixer who's abroad. Joel Embiid. Joel Embiid's off playing with USA Basketball as they prepare for the Olympics. And there is already a controversy brewing. And it's not because Joel Embiid's done anything wrong. I want to be really clear. Joel Embiid has done absolutely nothing wrong to this point. He hasn't started a squabble with a teammate. He hasn't been a prima donna. There's nothing wrong with how Joel Embiid has held himself or has acted with the national team. The real controversy right now seems to be on basketball Twitter, where people are trying to actively campaign for Anthony Edwards or Bam Adebayo starting over Joel Embiid, because they think this section of basketball X thinks that Joel Embiid and his style and the national team's desire or belief that they need to play through him in the post is causing them to not click on all cylinders, that he's gumming up the inside and that he's slowing down their pace of play too much. Now, we can, obviously, if you're a Sixers fan, you know that this is just kind of the cost of doing business. This is the cost of having Joel Embiid on your team. He is going to command the ball in the post, or at least that's where he's best suited to. He's not going to play a speedy style of basketball because he can't. He physically is not the same guy that he was when he broke into the league after playing at Kansas and missing a year. If you go back and you watch Joel Embiid, his rookie year, he ran like a gazelle. He looked like the most athletic, huge human being you've ever seen. He's not that guy now. And that's okay, because a traditional center doesn't necessarily have to be. The question has been, is having a traditional center really the best thing for this national team? And I would argue that in an Olympic cycle where you have a really weird kind of combination that I don't think we've seen since, I think it's like 06, where there's a lot of vets and a few young guys, and it feels more like a transitional year instead of a bunch of guys who are all hitting their prime at the same time. I think that there's a concern from basketball fans as a whole that maybe this wasn't the time to experiment with having this traditional center. I think it's fine. You have the ability to have a guy who was an MVP 2 years ago and has been a top 3 MVP finisher multiple seasons. When that guy says he wants to commit to your team, you take that guy on your team. I will once again point out the fact that Anthony Davis, when he plays head-to-head against Joel Embiid, gets his ass kicked. I will point out, once again, head-to-head, when Rudy Gobert lines up against Joel Embiid, he gets his ass kicked. I will line up, once again, when Nikola Jokic lines up against Joel Embiid, Jokic gets his ass kicked. Now, the result might not go the Sixers' way every time, but Joel Embiid heads up against some of the best bigs in the league typically comes out on top, at least in that head-to-head matchup. Embiid is something that no other team in this tournament has. If you want to make the pitch about Gobert, you want to make the pitch about Jokic, about them being better bigs in their respective ways, that Gobert might be a more rangy and versatile defender at this point in his career than Embiid is. If you want to make the case that Nikola Jokic has better court vision and is a more dynamic passer than Joel Embiid, that's fine. You can certainly do that. But I would still say that on any given day, if you were able to offer up one center to start a team with, an Olympic team in this case, given the way that the international game is played, Joel Embiid is a physical player. He's also one who will try to be a foul merchant from time to time, and sometimes that'll work and sometimes it won't. But that's a guy that you want to have. And in fairness, if Embiid weren't on this team and it were Anthony Davis, who historically doesn't like playing center, or Bam Adebayo, that to me isn't an Olympic-level center. I think Anthony Davis should typically be a center. Throughout much of his career, he's pitched a fit and wanted to play the 4. Bam Adebayo is a fine player. To me, he's not an Olympic-level starting center. That's just me. That's where I'm at. I could be wrong. I'm not, but I could be. Now, there was one cool thing that came out of the USA basketball camp, and I'm gonna throw to this because I've noticed that there have been a lot of very positive interactions of late between Joel Embiid and LeBron James. We're going to go to this really quick because it was a pretty cool moment. You have LeBron and Joel Embiid playing this heads-up game of trying to make a lefty shot in practice. We'll go to this right now.
I got 5. I got 5. You got 4. I made mine. Then I had another switch, 3 and 4. So I got 4. He said 5. I said he had 4. So I got 6. Big switch is 4. Big switch 4? Yeah. Oh, he made. Ah! Okay.
Here's Embiid.
Oh my God!
I don't know what was going on with the right. Lefty bank switch. So I think at the end there they were arguing about did it hit the rim after it banked off. They said bank swish lefty. All right. Anyway. There's a cool thing here, and I'm glad that Nico pointed this out because he's right. If you're a Sixers fan, there is something really nice about the fact that Embiid gets to play with the best in the world. Like, let's just have, can we have a second here to be honest about Joel Embiid and about like the things he's gone through? Okay, Joel Embiid started from nothing in Cameroon. He lost his younger brother in a tragic accident. He lost a year of his career to a navicular bone fracture. He's gone through multiple freak injuries, a broken orbital bone, multiple facial fractures, actually, multiple knee injuries, gastroenteritis a bunch of times. He's gone through things throughout his career that people have kind of labeled him as being injury prone. And in many cases, they've been freak injuries. Now, a big guy getting a meniscus tear, that kind of is what it is. You would expect it. It can happen, right? But Joel Embiid's gone through a lot in his career. And for better or worse, there have been a lot of years where he has lined up with a team that has not been up to par. He has lined up for a team that has been talent deficient. The thought that in his rookie year or in his second year that someday he would go on to become an American citizen, that he would decide to represent the United States, not because it was the easy way to potentially win a gold medal and help his legacy and all that, but because he has a son who's born in the U.S., and he said he wants to represent the country that his son is a citizen of. That same guy now has the ability to go to France, to go represent the United States of America, to be their best center, and to be a guy who actually gets to go and play with the best in the world. There is something really cool about that. And if you are a human being who has any level of empathy to think about all the things that this guy has gone through, and again, the tragedy around his brother, and then he names his son after his brother, which still like kind of chokes me up. Maybe it does to you too. The fact that this guy now finally gets to go out and take the court with LeBron James and gets to take the court with some of the best players that the United States has to offer is a really cool moment. And as a Sixers fan, you should feel good for him. And as a basketball fan, there should be more people from other team fan bases who say, that's really cool. And instead, Joel Embiid's getting derided by a bunch of dipshits on Twitter because he doesn't play the game fast enough or because they think that he's holding the team back. Their pace of play is lower than you would expect from a men's national team. Are you serious? That's legitimately where we're at this point? Like, that's the argument?
Anthony Davis should play above Joel Embiid. He should start in his place because Anthony Davis plays a more advantageous style of game for the pace of play that would most benefit the rest of the United States basketball team.
Get out. Just go. Stop it. If you think that there's another team in the world that would have the opportunity to have Joel Embiid and would turn it down, you're out of your mind. Good for Joel Embiid. Good for him getting to play for this national team. And you know what? They're going to win a gold medal. He's going to have a gold medal on his legacy. Whether or not he ever wins an NBA championship kind of is what it is. He will get a gold medal. He'll have that on his Hall of Fame induction. He'll have an MVP, at least one. He'll have a gold medal, and good on him. And good for him. And I really do genuinely think that more American basketball fans should be appreciative of the fact that he chose to represent the United States. This bullshit narrative that he picked the U.S. because it's the easiest path to a gold medal is such nonsense. And if you listen to the guy and if you follow what he has been through, you would understand that there is a lot more to that decision than just taking the easy way. Joel Embiid, by the way, could have taken the easy way in the NBA. He could have, over the last few years of playing MVP caliber basketball and having poor teams constructed around him, he could have squawked. He could have publicly made it known that if this doesn't turn around right away, I'm going to want out. He could have waged a war in the media to try to get himself out of town to go play with another star. He could have said, I want to go play in Golden State with Steph Curry. He could have said, I want to go play in Los Angeles with LeBron James. And hell, if LeBron had said, yeah, I want Joel as well, and you had that hypothetical swap that people have brought up a bunch of times about Anthony Davis for Joel Embiid, that could have happened. He could have forced his way to the Knicks before they became the Nova Knicks. And instead, he's remained mostly quiet about his dissatisfaction with how this team has built rosters around him. And now, to his credit, and to Daryl Morey's credit, they have put together a very good roster. We talked about it the last couple of weeks. They have put a very good roster around him. But in the meantime, this is a really cool experience for him. And I know that we talk about, like, what is it like to recruit when you play at the international level? Is there really something to be said for going out and having the ability to recruit potential teammates? It's a little bit different right now. Sixers now have no cap space. They've given copious amounts of cash to Paul George. They've given a max extension to Tyrese Maxey. Joel Embiid himself is on a max deal. You're not trying to go out and get these guys now. What you are trying to do is kind of elevate your profile as a player on the international stage. And potentially, if one of these guys becomes a malcontent, or if down the line, one of these guys is a little bit later on in his career and is looking for a contract, and there are things that you can maneuver, that potentially there is somebody who wants to come here and play with Joel Embiid. And if not, that one of these stars goes back to their teams. And if one of their teams underachieve and you have a veteran player who might get bought out, well, now you have somebody who goes and says, hey, you know what? Embiid's a lot of fun to play with. There's something going on in Philly. There's something good brewing there. There is no downside to Embiid playing in the Olympics. I honestly, a few months ago, when it came out that Embiid was going to join the national team, I sat back and said, that's more miles on a body that can barely handle the miles of an NBA season. I have changed my stance. I think that from a legacy perspective, it is 100% worth it for Joel Embiid to play. I think that if the Sixers were legitimately concerned about him making himself unavailable to play the upcoming season, they would have had him, or they would have begged, they would have requested, they would have figured out a way to get it through to him. We really don't want you to play in this tournament. Kawhi Leonard backed out, right? Kawhi's been hurt. He backed out of the chance to represent the U.S. because of injuries and because of, I would assume, some pressure from the Clippers to not participate. If you can't be healthy enough for the team that's paying you millions and millions of dollars, how dare you, to an extent, go off and have a little foray in Paris. But anyway, good for Joel Embiid. It's a really cool moment. Now, there's one other thing that I wanted to get to today. I knew damn well it was going to light Philly Sports Talk Radio on fire. I knew this. I think we all knew that it was going to happen. Jalen Hurts was left off a top 10 list for quarterbacks in the NFL. And it wasn't just some dummy who decided to put this list out. It wasn't some just random jamoke. It wasn't a couple of bloggers who did it. And I say bloggers lovingly because, as we know, I got my start in this market as a blogger. But this was a situation where it was insiders. This is a situation where there were some executives on the poll. And Jalen Hurts was listed as not being a top 10 quarterback. And I'm still trying to understand why. Now, Jalen Hurts had a rough year last year. We, I think, can all agree on it. But the fact that he was left off of a top 10 list, 1 year removed from being a finalist, a top 2 finalist for the league MVP, is absolutely insane to me. Absolutely insane. I'm going to pull up the list here because we need to actually do a little bit of a deep dive into it. To me, it is such absolute insanity that you wouldn't have that guy who, in some ways, outplayed Patrick Mahomes head-to-head in the Super Bowl a couple of years ago. The fact that they wouldn't have that guy in the top 10 is absolutely crazy to me. Let me know in the comments below. Like, am I out of my mind for thinking that he shouldn't be left out of a top 10 list? I'm looking for this list right now. I had it pulled up and now it's gone. We'll get there in a second. Let's talk about what Jalen Hurts is as a quarterback. Jalen Hurts is a guy who is a dual threat. And yes, last year, as I've argued a few times, he was significantly injured. It never came out what his actual injury was or where it happened or when it happened. But I think it happened around week 4. He tweaked his knee. About 10 weeks later, I think he tweaked it again. And I think that ultimately it was a bullshit cop-out that he was blamed in large part for why last year fell apart, for why the Eagles went on a massive tailspin to end their season. I think the fact that he was hurt fundamentally changed their entire offense. Because when a dual threat quarterback can't be a dual threat quarterback, it has to change what your offense is. It has to. Here's the top 10 list because it's offensive to me. We're going to throw this up on the screen. And we're going to dissect this as a group of people. You can, again, join me in the comments or let me know after the fact. Top 10 list. ESPN survey of executives, coaches, and scouts. How does so many people get it wrong? All right, let's go. Pat Mahomes at number 1. Is anybody going to argue with Patrick Mahomes as a top 10 quarterback? Absolutely not. He is the best quarterback in the league. Joe Burrow at number 2. I'm taking crazy pills. Joe Burrow is not the number 2 quarterback in the National Football League. We'll come back to him in a little bit, but there's absolutely no way. No. Josh Allen at number 3. We could have a conversation about whether Josh Allen should be number 3 or not. Is he a top 10 talent at quarterback? Yes. Does he always play like a top 10 quarterback or a top 3 quarterback? Absolutely not. Lamar Jackson at number 4, the reigning MVP. Multi-time MVP, right? Like Lamar Jackson's number 4. Okay, fine. I have no problem with Lamar Jackson being a top 10 quarterback at all. Has he won a Super Bowl? No. Is he one of the best quarterbacks in the league? Of course. Matt Stafford at number 5 is fucking bananas. Like, seriously? Matt Stafford. Are we talking about the same guy? Matthew Stafford was good a few years ago. He's still a decent enough quarterback. He still has something left in his arm. The 5th best quarterback in the National Football League? No. Herbert at number 6. Somebody is nuts, or many people are nuts. Herbert is a good young quarterback. He's not a top 10 quarterback, or he's at least not a top 6 quarterback. What the hell are we doing? CJ Stroud at number 7. I happen to like CJ Stroud a lot. You can convince me, hypothetically, that CJ Stroud is a top 10 quarterback. I think he took a very bad Houston team and elevated them. And at that position, to be able to elevate Houston the way that he did and keep them in games and win them games, pull games that were from the jaws of defeat, I can make a case that CJ Stroud as a young up-and-coming quarterback should be a top 10. Aaron Rodgers at number 8, coming off an Achilles tear. Woof. Jared Goff, perfectly fine quarterback. Had a nice year for an upstart Detroit team. Top 10? Okay. Dak Prescott, who's never won anything. Dak Prescott, who has been surrounded by fantastic or really good at worst receiving corps. Had one of the best running backs in the National Football League for many years of his career in Ezekiel Elliott, and an excellent backup in Tony Pollard, and one of the best offensive lines. Top 10. Interesting. Now, apparently Joe Giglio said he doesn't think it's crazy to say Jalen Hurts is not a top 10 QB, and I think Keyshawn Johnson actually went on TV and bemoaned the fact that Hurts wasn't in the top 10. We have to have a conversation, right? Let's talk about the top 10 quarterbacks in the NFL. And somebody needs to explain to me how Jalen Hurts isn't in the top 10. Mahomes, sure. Joe Burrow, maybe. Top 10, I guess. Boy, there is something to be said for there being this desire to have the next Peyton Manning or the next Tom Brady. There is something about, and like, here we go. Like, we'll wade into these waters. There is a desire among some fans, among some media, for there to be that good, prototypical white quarterback who can be the guy that's the face of the league. They want another Peyton Manning. They want another Tom Brady. Joe Burrow is a very talented quarterback who has also had a very good receiver on the outside, at least one for most of his career, who suffered a very serious knee injury. Joe Burrow is not the second best quarterback in the National Football League. That's total bullshit. Josh Allen is maybe as physically gifted of a quarterback as you can find in the NFL. But he doesn't always rise to the moment. He has not gotten his team into a Super Bowl. He has not had his team on the precipice of reaching greatness, of hoisting the Lombardi Trophy. Number 3, Lamar Jackson has taken some Ravens teams that probably shouldn't have been in the conversation at times to be one of the best teams in the AFC, and he has played at an MVP level, and he has won and has been named league MVP. He should be in the top 10. I'm no issue there. Matt Stafford, 2 years ago, absolutely a top 10 quarterback. He's not the 5th best quarterback in the NFL. There's no way. Justin Herbert does not belong near the top 6. I could make a case that Herbert doesn't belong in the top 10. That, to me, if there's part of me that says, there are certain executives or certain insiders who want to see that next Tom Brady, and that's why they love Joe Burrow so much, I have no idea what we're talking about with Herbert. None. And I like Herbert, but he's not a top 10 quarterback. He has a cannon. He has physical tools that make you think that he could turn into a legitimate top 5 quarterback in the league. But right now, if the game, like if we're going straight up, you're trying to win a playoff game, what experience does he have? What has he done? He hasn't elevated that Chargers team. He's not a top 10 quarterback. CJ Stroud, I'll play the game. CJ Stroud, of all the young quarterbacks in the NFL, if I were starting a team right now, he would be my pick. I would even take CJ Stroud. I would certainly take him over Justin Herbert. I would consider taking CJ Stroud over Joe Burrow. He hasn't had the big injury yet. Hopefully he doesn't have one. I think there's a case to be made that CJ Stroud could end up being a more dynamic player and end up ultimately finding more success than Joe Burrow. I feel like I'm really crapping on Joe Burrow now. CJ Stroud is a perfectly fine quarterback. Aaron Rodgers coming off an Achilles tear is not a top 10 quarterback in the NFL. Absolutely not. The same way that Tom Brady's last year went in the NFL, that final year where he could barely throw the ball around, the same way that Peyton Manning could barely throw the ball around his last year with the Broncos, Aaron Rodgers isn't a top 10 quarterback. He's not. Not off an Achilles tear. We have no idea what he's going to look like. None. Aaron Rodgers is at his best when he's able to maximize not only being a legitimate pocket passer, but being able to roll out and to throw on the run. What the hell is that going to look like after an Achilles tear? And with that in mind, top 10? No. Jared Goff, if there's one guy on this list who's on the list because of the success of their team last year, and not necessarily because of his actual abilities themselves, it's Jared Goff. Maybe he's fine. Maybe because of the success he led Detroit to last year, although it wasn't all him. The defense was very good. Maybe Jared Goff should be a top 10. Dak Prescott, that is one hell of a wild take. The idea that Dak Prescott should be in the top 10 and Jalen Hurts shouldn't, if at the very least, if you went through those other 9 and you said each of those guys for different reasons, because of Super Bowl wins in the case of Stafford, or because of, being a dynamic player in Josh Allen, or being what you think is the prototypical quarterback in Joe Burrow. I guess Rodgers on there because he won a Super Bowl, is because he plays in New York. Like, what's the reason? Dak Prescott shouldn't be in the top 10 if Jalen Hurts isn't. That's silly. That to me is proof that there are some psychotic people in the National Football League, in the coaching ranks, in the executive ranks, in the scouting ranks. I think Dak Prescott, pure talent-wise, might be a top 10 guy. What keeps him out of the top 10? He doesn't perform in big games. Like, there's a reason that Cowboys fans went to the end of last season and actively wanted the Cowboys to move on. There is a reason that the Cowboys didn't initially want to give Dak Prescott a massive extension. The belief out there was that they might have wanted to try to pry a guy from another team at some point, or that they might have wanted to try to trade up into the top 5 at some point and get their next quarterback. I don't think that Dallas truly believes in Dak Prescott. I don't think they believe in his ability to be a legitimate, game-changing starting quarterback. Dak Prescott has had fantastic teams around him and has not risen to the moment. He has had CeeDee Lamb. He has had, like I said before, Zeke Elliott and Tony Pollard. He's had Gallup on the outside, and a great line. We can't understate how important having a good offensive line in front of you is. Prescott's had it. Hasn't been able to take the Cowboys to the conference championship. Hasn't been able to take them to the Super Bowl. Get to a Super Bowl, Dak Prescott can be on the top 10. And again, pure gifts, pure physical gifts, maybe. Maybe you could make a case that because he is a dual threat quarterback, he should be top 10 in terms of talent. But you can't have him there and have Jalen Hurts out. Now, whether you want to say that Dak Prescott is maybe more lethal on the long ball than Jalen Hurts, you can maybe make that case. If you want to argue that Dak Prescott has a longer track record of success or a longer track record of putting up big numbers than Jalen Hurts, well, that's true. He's been in the league longer. But there is virtually, I cannot imagine that if you legitimately asked every GM in the National Football League, you can today trade for Dak Prescott or Jalen Hurts, that you're am I really to believe that more than 20 teams are going to say, yeah, you know what? Dak Prescott's our guy. No. Jalen Hurts has been able to take an Eagles team to a Super Bowl. Again, he outplayed, for large chunks of that game, the best quarterback in the league, Patrick Mahomes. He had the Eagles on the doorstep of winning a Super Bowl. Last year was rough. He was hurt. He tried to play through an injury. Perhaps he should have taken time away. Perhaps it was an injury that he just simply could not take time off and it was going to heal on its own. Or it was going to take too much time and he didn't want to run the risk of the team cratering without him. Jalen Hurts is going to be healthy this year. And man, not only do you have A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith both back, you have them well paid. Not only do you have them, you have Saquon Barkley, the best running back that's been on this team since probably Shady, the best downhill runner in God knows how long. Yes, you don't have Jason Kelce, and that could potentially prove to be a complication. Jalen Hurts is easily a top 10 quarterback. I think it's actually kind of shameful in a sense that he's not on this list. There's actually something I meant to pull up before the show. And so I'm gonna double check it here. And I'm also gonna go out to the comments really quick because I know that there are some thoughts about it. Ford thinks that Hurts should be somewhere in the 8 to 10 range, which while I'm sitting here kind of angry about the idea that he's not a top 10 guy, I can make the case that just based on track record and based on past performance, he should be top 5. I can understand penalizing him a bit because of how last year ended and because of the precipitous fall that the Eagles suffered. I can understand it from that standpoint. And if that's why the executives and that's why the coaches and that's why the scouts ultimately decided to go against having Jalen Hurts in the top 10, I could kind of understand penalizing him, but not keeping him off the list entirely. I can't. Ford also says, death taxes and the Cowgirls losing early in the playoffs. It's hard to argue. It really is. I was looking for, and this looks like it's gone now. All right. Let's just check from last year. All right. So last year, and there's actually another interesting name that was omitted that I guess if you really wanted to make a case, could have been or should have been on that list. Wasn't. He happens to play for a team out west. We'll get back to him in a second. So Dak Prescott finished second in MVP voting last year. He's in the top 10. Josh Allen finished 5th in voting. Patrick Mahomes finished 7th. Stafford finished 8th. Stroud finished 9th. So if you wanted to make a case that MVP voting had something to do with it, you can. But then that would mean that you have totally discounted the guy who finished 4th in MVP voting, which was Brock Purdy. Now, do I think Brock Purdy is an elite quarterback? Would I say he's a top 5 guy? Absolutely not. Do I think he's a top 10 guy? Not really. At least on skill, no, I don't think he's a top 10 quarterback. But if we're going off of his ability to take his team far into the playoffs and his ability to maximize the talent around him, and the fact that he was a top 4 finisher in MVP voting a year ago, there's a case to be made that perhaps he should be considered in the top 10. I think that there's a case to be made, if you're a San Francisco fan, that Purdy is more deserving than a guy like Justin Herbert who's never done anything. I'm going back to the year before, the year that Jalen Hurts finished second in the MVP voting. Josh Allen was also in the top 5, as was Joe Burrow. Trevor Lawrence was number 7 that year. Justin Fields was 10th in MVP voting that year. Herbert was 12th. I'm just trying to get a little bit of a better feel here for like what else could have gone into the actual decision. What else went into this list? Aaron Rodgers won the MVP in 2021 and in 2020. Okay. Lamar Jackson won it in 2019 and then, of course, won it last year. I'm honestly struggling to figure out how some of those guys ended up in the top 10. And again, I think that the way that scouts fall in love with the idea of a big arm, of a cannon for an arm, I think that's how Justin Herbert ends up there. But I think that's actually the most egregious addition to that list. I'm going to go over to Ford here really quick. Ford says the list isn't terrible, but Stroud, no. Prescott, hell no. Again, I think that Stroud, as the representative for being the young quarterback on the list, I would take Stroud. I think Stroud is more of a winner than Justin Herbert has proven to be. We'll see what this year looks like. Because if Stroud is able to elevate Houston again and is able to go out and pull off last-minute wins that are based on his big arm, and he's able to elevate Houston beyond where Herbert takes the Chargers, then it's a legitimate conversation to have. That's where I'm leaning right now. And then I'm going to go over here to Nico, who says Herbert at 6 is insanity, and I totally agree. Jalen Hurts might not be let me reset this. Jalen Hurts may have been a top 2 MVP finisher 2 seasons ago. He may have been a guy who was in charge of a team that ultimately had a massive collapse at the end of last season. But the notion that he's not a top 10 quarterback in this National Football League going into this year on a list that has Justin Herbert, who's never done jack shit, and Aaron Rodgers, who's coming off an Achilles tear, and Matt Stafford, who is not nearly the quarterback he was when they won a Super Bowl, is absolutely insane to me. So the real question is, what is it that Jalen Hurts hasn't put on tape, that allows or gives these scouts and executives and coaches the notion that he should at least be in the top 10? Took a team to a Super Bowl. They went head-to-head with Patrick Mahomes. What am I missing? Let me know in the comments section. Let me know over on X at JoyOnBroad. I want to thank everybody who joined me today for this show. I will tell you, there was one other thing that I wanted to get to today, but I think we're going to save it for Friday. We're going to get back to football for a little bit on Friday, because there are more names, oddly enough, popping up on the U.S. men's national team radar. More international managers apparently interested in the U.S. job. Not only did we see De La Fuente's name get mentioned, the manager from Spain who just won the Euro. Rafa Benitez's name is out there. This morning, Gareth Southgate apparently, quote unquote, opted to leave England. Perhaps it was a mutual decision and they let him leave with his head held high after they just lost in the Euro semifinal. His name has been bantered about. Of course, Teron Little's name is out there, and that makes me want to gag. We might talk about that a little bit on Friday. Plus, any other big news that breaks in Philly sports or in national sports. I want to thank everybody who joined me today. Make sure, if you haven't done so, subscribe to The Russ Joy Show wherever you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Pandora, Amazon Music, anywhere you get your podcasts. And subscribe to the channel on YouTube. Please, seriously, it's very helpful. Makes me feel nice when I get the little notification that somebody subscribed to the channel. If you haven't done so already, if you're watching, like the video. That seriously helps. Share the video directly from YouTube. That also helps. Subscribe to the channel. Those are the 3 ways you can help on the Russ Joy Show YouTube or on the Joy Media account. Remember, mine is the one with the black and white logo that looks like it's related to podcasts, not the one with the guy from like the Philippines or whatever who has like 245,000 followers. That is certainly not me. I think you can see that we are not the same person. Go subscribe to those channels, subscribe to this podcast wherever you get your podcasts, and I will be back on Friday. In the meantime, you'll probably be able to find me at some point this week with Snow the Goalie. There is a chance that I'm going to dust off the microphone for It's Just Wrestling because there's a lot that's been happening in the pro wrestling world. And Crossing Broadcast is on Thursday. Kevin Kincaid in the lead chair over there. I will try to make an appearance on there. That happens to be a day that I have a lot of meetings, but we will try. So don't let this be the end of me and you talking together and interacting together. Let's keep it going. Spiral out. Thanks for the kind words, saying great show at the end. I know that I say this a lot, but when you share the show, if you tell a couple people about it, it really does help. I have watched that podcast feed continue to grow, which makes me very happy. I want to see the YouTube number continue to grow. I appreciate all of you so much for checking out the show. In the meantime, you can follow me over on Twitter at JoyOnBroad. So I'll catch you guys later this week. Thanks again for watching the Russ Joy Show, which apparently is the fastest growing Philly sports show on YouTube and in the podcast feed. That's what they're saying. Who they are, I don't know. Talk to you soon.